Hello, viewers. Welcome to another edition of the Environmental Protection Agency's monthly feature, The Environment Matters, where we highlight the work of the agency in the context of national development and sensitize you on your roles and responsibilities as partners in this process. I'm your moderator, Candace Thompson, Senior Environmental Officer at the Protection Agency. I want to thank you for joining us for this edition of the Environment Matters, and we're going to be focusing on a very important topic. Actually, we're going to be seeking to answer the question, why water matters. And joining me for this discussion are two lovely young ladies, very experienced in the area of water resources management. They are Miss Felicia Adams Kelman,
Good morning.
Senior Environmental Officer at the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as Ms. Michelle Nurse, who is also a Senior Environmental Officer at the Environmental Protection Agency, and they have, of course, responsibility for water quality management. But before we actually get into our discussion, water and sanitation is the goal number 6 on the list of sustainable development goals in the United Nations 2030 agenda. And probably for those who don't know what the SDGs are, it's 17 goals that they have focusing on different areas, different issues which needs to be addressed in order to obtain sustainable development. And sustainable development is basically the balance, the social, economic, and environmental balance, right? So when we talk about water, and I'm sure if we ask the average person, just say something about water, what do you think some of those responses would be?
Water, Guyana is the land of many resources. Water is life. I think those are most common responses we hear at the EPA.
Mm-hmm.
And it is indeed true because water is life. It is essential for humans. Every function in your body requires water. Not only that, every activity that would sustain human life also requires water. So activities related to agriculture, industrial activities, all of these things are very important, and that's why water is a very important resource.
But you're going into the more, technical
Yes.
applications. But for most persons, I mean, I've had experience asking people before, and you would hear, yes, water is life.
Yes.
People just, sometimes just say it abstractly because, it's GWI slogan. And they would say things like, you need water for bathing, drinking, brushing your teeth, transportation, and all these
Yes.
things, right? And those are all correct. But we need to, to delve deep in terms of what water is as a resource, and water actually underpins life and development. It's pivotal in poverty reduction and fighting inequalities and injustices, and it's even vital to us moving in a sustainable path and actually achieving sustainable development. And sometimes persons don't see the link, they don't see the connection. But when you're in countries where there's water scarcity, when the reality really hits you, then you're able to better relate. So sometimes we take, as you said, most people say, oh, Guyana is the land of many waters, and we kind of take that for granted. So just to speak, I know, Felicia, you highlighted earlier, you started to describe what water is in terms of water being a resource. But if we could just help the public to understand, what is water as a resource, as a natural resource?
Well, water as a natural resource is basically surface water and groundwater, which is available for persons and can be used. I know you don't want me to get technical, and we like to say that Guyana is the land of many waters, but in actuality, only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh water. So as a resource, we only have a drop in the ocean. And so it is very important for persons to manage and not take water for granted when they're using it for whatever purpose they
Correct.
have.
And you answered one of my trivia questions, actually. But I wanted to ask the viewing audience a few questions just to basically test your knowledge, of water. More often than not, we say the chemical formula for water is H2O, but we don't really know what that means. But although we know, I know we know what the hydrogen and the hydrogen and oxygen that comprise water. But although we know the chemical formula, and some persons just say that this is the chemical formula, but we often take it for granted because although we know the chemical formula, science knows it, yes, we can put together hydrogen and oxygen and make water, or water, right? So that goes to show how indispensable it is, right? And in humans in all our wisdom and with all our technologies, at least at this point, we can't make water. So we should really value it. So I'm going to ask you some questions just to test your knowledge of water. So Felicia mentioned that only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh, which means that the remaining, of course, we know the maximum percentage we're looking at is 100. The remaining 97% would obviously be salt water. However, of that 3%, I want you to tell me how much of that 3% you think is available to us. Do you think all the 3% of the fresh water on Earth is available, to us for consumption for different use? I know some persons saying yes, some saying no. Actually, no. Of that 3%, less than 1% is actually available for us, and the other 2% thereabout is locked up in the form of ice caps and glaciers, right? So actually, the amount of fresh water that we have available is not as abundant as we think. It's approximately 1%, but it's actually less than 1%. And fortunately, yes, for us in Guyana, we are geographically located, we're aptly located, as a matter of fact, where we have access to many of those freshwater sources, but that's not the reality for many parts of the world, right? So the next time you leave that tap running, right, it's less than 1% for the entire world that's available. All right, so my next question is, what percent of your body is water? What percentage of your body do you think comprise of water? All right, so I'm sure you would have guessed. So the answer is 60%, approximately 60% of the human body is water. So basically, we're water creatures. More than half of our bodies are water, and is water. Sorry, our body is water, and that explains the fact that we were born in since conception. We were there floating around in the amniotic sac, and then after we're delivered and so on, most of our organs thrive on the ability to rejuvenate and have that supply of water. So yes, we're water creatures, approximately 60%. My next question is, what percent of your brain do you think is water?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
70%.
Exactly. So a large portion again of our brain is water. Hence, the need for us to be hydrated and so on, and how persons can actually get when they're dehydrated, because the brain is dependent on water, and it can't really function well. All right, so this next question, how long, Felicia, do you know, can a person live without water? We know that someone can live on average a month without food, but how long can a person live without water?
A person can live without water for 1 week.
1 week, approximately.
Approximately.
So there you go. You can live up to a month without food, but except it's rare, very rare, and by some miracle of God, that you could live past 1 week, without water. So I'm hoping that the audience are getting to understand the value of water and the role that water play in our life. So my next question is, a quarter of the fresh water that enters your home is used to do what? What do you think? A quarter of that fresh water that comes through the pipe from GWR that you fetch from the creek or wherever, that enters your home, what is it used to do?
Oh, I think for me is bathroom related activities, so mainly flushing of the toilets, I
Okay.
assume.
You're correct. So to flush the toilet, right? And now I'm happy that we have technologies now that are available. So the toilet tanks don't have to use that amount of water. And especially people who, you want to flush after every use, right? So imagine if on a weekend, let's say a persons are out during the week, so they're not home that much during the week. But weekends when you have everybody home and stuff, right? If you're flushing your toilet to approximately 30 times a day on average, right? How much water is being used? Fresh water, right? All right. So my next question is gonna bring you closer to home in terms of knowing what we have here, and it's which river forms the largest? Which river forms the country's largest river system, and its drainage encompasses most of Guyana. So this river actually runs through, most of Guyana. Which river is that?
Essequibo.
Yes, this is the Essequibo River, right? The mighty Essequibo. It runs through most of Guyana, and it has four major tributaries.
Yep.
Anybody want to guess what those tributaries? What are the tributaries with the Essequibo River?
One is Cayuni,
Cayuni,
Mazaruni,
Mazaruni.
Potaro,
Mm-hmm.
and Felicia, the last one, Demerara.
No.
The Rupununi.
Yes,
Rupununi.
Yeah, so the Rupununi, Cayuni, Mazaruni, and Potaro. Good. So this is it for your trivia. I hope you would have learned, something as it relates to our water resources and what we have in Guyana. All right. So bring me to my first question. Ladies. GWI has a mandate to store and provide safe water, potable water, right? And I know they use surface as well as groundwater. But what are the sources of surface water that is used to provide, fresh water? People, it's important to know where you're getting your water from, right? And especially for those of us who just have pipes, sometimes we take for granted that the water just comes through the pipe, but I think you will have a better appreciation knowing, what the source of the water is.
So indeed, GWI has three main sources of surface water. They don't just run through the pipes. A lot of treatment has to go into it before it can actually get into your households for use. And those three are the Lamaha Canal, which I think many persons may be familiar with, the Dakura watershed, that's in Linden, and the Demerara River.
The Demerara is in Linden, so
Yes,
they're
in
the
Linden
two.
as well. So
Okay.
those are the three main sources of surface water in Guyana.
And what about other? So there are three main sources of surface water. Then obviously the other sources would be groundwater.
Groundwater.
So what would be the sources of groundwater?
For Georgetown, coastal aquifers are used to provide 90% of the population with water. They have approximately over 125 wells along the coast, and these are used to supply the population with water, and then the water is treated and pumped through the system to residents.
Could you explain for those who probably don't know what an aquifer is?
Okay, so an aquifer is an underground layer of water stored within the pore spaces within the rocks underground. Now, we can remove the water from these aquifers underground via wells or boreholes. And once water comes out from the rocks spaces and is pumped to the surface, it has to be refilled. So, as you can guess, when the more wells you dig and bore into the aquifer, the more water is removed, the more water has to be replenished to these aquifers. And the rate at which water is replenished to these aquifers is of concern to us at the agency, because you can't be taking out more than
you're
putting
putting
in, right? So that brings us to the topic of recharge. How is water recharged to the aquifers? And currently, it's rainwater, or a small amount of it comes from surface water.
So for those who might say, oh, when it rains, bad weather, right? It's not all that bad. You know, the rain has its purpose. And yes, some of those aquifers that are probably really dry and really need recharging so that we can be supplied with water would really we really welcome the rain in that regard. So in terms of the aquifers, the extracting the water, it sounds like a very complex process. And given that Felicia indicated there are three main sources of surface water, it means that a lot of the water that we get, that we utilize, it comes from groundwater, which must be not only financially, there are financial implications of getting, to the aquifer and so on, but there may also be some other related issues with getting that water out, because there are possibilities that the aquifers can become contaminated or so from poor practices, right?
Correct.
Correct.
And that's why we recommend persons to have qualified engineers to dig these wells. A lot of persons think, oh, I'm just gonna dig a hole and once I hit water, it's that. But the tools that you're using and the methods that you're using can all cause pollution to the groundwater if it's not done properly. And so we want to avoid that, and hence we recommend to persons to have proper engineers erect these wells.
And with that, it might be hard to even trace like the source of a specific contamination, because if there's an outbreak of some sort of illness that is linked to water, and there's several persons tapping into the aquifer, it might be difficult to actually trace where exactly the contact occurred.
Which is why it is very important that we protect this resource, because it is very hard to clean up groundwater. It's very expensive, because you only need a small amount to contaminate the whole aquifer, and then no one has access to clean water. And for us on the coast, this is very, very, very important. 90% of our water comes from groundwater. So the best thing to do is protect it. And to do that, as Felicia says, we must hire the right people to dig us the right holes, so that we can ensure that when you're tapping in, you ensure that you take precautions, that you place the well in the correct place to avoid contamination from sources such as septic tanks, such as manure and petroleum, underground petroleum storage tanks, so that no contamination can enter the well via the surface and come down the well, the borehole, to the aquifer.
And that's critical too, and the necessary approval, I would assume as well, for persons who want to drill wells, because it's important for you not only to try to cut on money and go through the cheapest means, but the cheapest means may turn out at times to be the most expensive one if something goes wrong. And I'm thinking in terms of the wells as well. Michelle mentioned a very valuable point there. That's important to know what's around, and if the location that you want to put it is suitable exactly, right? And to protect not only your well, but as she mentioned, the aquifer and everybody else, who is dependent on that. Excellent. So let's go further inland. What happens with freshwater resources in the hinterland areas? How do they get those, surface and ground or?
In inland areas, there are two aquifers. One is the Grupo Roraima aquifer, and that aquifer is shared between Brazil, Venezuela, and Guyana. Not a lot is known about it, but it does provide water for regions 7 and 8. And the other aquifer is the Boa Vista Sierra do Tucano North Savannah Aquifer.
Yes.
Quite a long name.
Yeah.
And that aquifer provides water for Latem, areas like Latem.
Okay.
And it's called transboundary because the aquifer is shared between Guyana
Countries. Mhm.
and Brazil.
And that's even more, I mean, you should pay more attention to that as well because
As
the
well.
aquifer is shared between our
And the
two
larger
countries are
part,
among. There's one that the other one, Venezuela,
Brazil,
Brazil, and Guyana. So even, you know, more so, the impacts would be transboundary as well.
Yeah, and they're shallow aquifers, so that means that they're more susceptible in those areas to contamination. Because in those areas, once again, people, their sanitation practices usually involve pit latrines. And this way, contaminants can come through the surface and percolate down into the groundwater. And the larger part of the aquifer is actually in Brazil. So that means that when rainwater and recharge is occurring, it will impact us depending on, you don't know what your neighbor is doing. Is your neighbor have good practices? Are they ensuring that their waste is properly treated? Because since a large portion of the aquifer is there and it's a shallow aquifer and rain and it's being recharged, if they have poor practices, it will affect us when we use the water on our side. And the same applies to us.
Mm-hmm. And that's important because sometimes we say, well, you know, it's the neighbor. I'm not really concerned about what they're doing.
Exactly.
But ultimately, the practice of someone else can affect us. And knowing water and water travels and all of that, and you know, the upstream, downstream, whatever happens upstream can affect those downstream and all of that. So it's important for us to, you know, be cognizant of what's happening and how these things can actually impact. Yes. So I want to move on to some of the pressures as it relates to water resources. We know Guyana is a land of many waters, correct? But we also learn that that is just a portion of that, less than 1%, which is available to us. And we can actually compromise the amount of water available to us by our actions, right? In terms of quantity as well as the quality of the water. And so there are some pressures on our water resources. The State of the Environment report spoke to some of them, and I just want you to, you know, share with the public what are some of those things that are affecting our water resources, that we shouldn't just take it for granted that Guyana is a land of many waters, and people complain about why they have to pay for water. Water's all over, you know, in Guyana, and they don't see the need to pay for it. But I think, as you spoke earlier, Michelle, and understanding that this water has to go through a process, and in order for it to get, you know, to our homes or offices or wherever, for us, we just go to the pipe and we turn on, and people, you know, don't usually think about where this water is coming from. When the problem will come is when you turn on and there's no water. Then, you know, everybody got, you know, big issue with that, and why is it that you can't have water in a land of many waters? So, but we have some responsibilities as well as citizens, as citizens of this country. The companies, GWI has responsibility, yes, to provide us with safe water, but we also have responsibilities as citizens to ensure that is sustained and adequate and so on. So what are some of the, you know, the issues, the pressures on our freshwater resources? Now we're speaking specifically to freshwater.
All right, Candice. As you rightly said, the State of the Environment report did highlight some of the main pressures that we have on freshwater resources, and I'll just elaborate on those that were mentioned. So the first one is untreated discharge from households. So we did mention that persons utilize the majority of their water for toilet facilities. But what the report said is actually per day, Georgetown requires 20 million gallons of water. So if that water is coming into the household, it stands to reason that a large portion of it is being discharged. And what is being discharged is the gray water, which we would get from laundry and bathing, and we have the black water, which we get from sewage, the toilet facilities. And those are being directly discharged into waterways without treatment. And if that continues, it obviously will put pressure on the water system to provide for persons. So that's one of the first ones that was mentioned.
All right, so we're gonna take a break on that note as we so you spoke firstly to the households,
Yes.
right? So we're gonna take a break, and when we get back, we're gonna be continuing our discussion on why water matters, and more so on the pressures as they are in Guyana. So do stay tuned.
Gosh,
Morning, Miss Sonia.
morning, Miss Cheryl. I'm late for work.
I noticed the other day y'all had a big campaign with them police officers, so shutting down them people barbecue, wedding, dance. Man, how y'all expect these people to make money and survive?
No, Miss Cheryl, that is far from the truth. The EPA and the Guyana Police Force are actually working together to ensure that persons who conduct certain businesses and activities are authorized. We're trying to allow them to adhere to the noise regulations.
Well, this gotta be a new law. What law is this?
These laws were always in place. It's now that we're getting all these complaints at the agency, we are trying to enforce them. The Environmental Protection Act has been in place since 1996, and it states that persons and businesses must apply for environmental authorization before operating a sound-making device.
Well, girl, I never know this thing is part of the law.
So if you're keeping a barbecue or an open-air function, like a wedding or a concert, especially in your community, right, and you're playing a music system, you have to apply for a short-term noise permit. And for persons that operate in a business and you got generators and stuff, you have to apply for a long-term permit. And that is applicable to bars and hotspots and clubs also.
Well, now that you explain it, I understand it. It's unfair to the elderly, sick people, and even them little children.
That is correct. According to the World Health Organization, loud noise can cause stress, sleep deprivation, and hearing impairment. And I'm sure you wouldn't want that.
Oh, now I understand. Thank you for explaining it, Miss Sonia.
For more information, you can contact the EPA at 225-5471 or visit our office at Ganges Street, North Sophia, Georgetown.
Can you come around, please?
Morning. My name is Deborah. I just want to get some information.
Good morning. I am Odessa Duncan, Senior Environmental Officer. How may I assist you today?
Tell me something. They got this man next door by me breaking on this big building, and it's bare asbestos in the roof. I could remember hearing on your TV program that asbestos is dangerous to human health and the environment.
This is correct. The Environmental Protection Act states that any person or facility that is storing, treating, transporting, and/or disposing of hazardous waste material must be authorized by the EPA to do so.
Oh, but it's now I'm really hearing about this hazardous waste thing. Tell me something more.
Hazardous waste are waste material with properties that are dangerous or capable of having a harmful effect on human health and the environment, including things like paint, fertilizers, and pesticides, waste oil, and asbestos. These things have the potential to cause cancer, birth defects, kidney failure, and reproductive impairment, with children being at the highest risk. The environmental authorization in this case gives the legal right to transport, store, and dispose of this material in accordance with the EP Act Chapter 2005 Laws of Guyana. Now, this ensures you and your operation and your process is safe for the environment and human health.
So you mean to tell me that all them leftover Christmas paint that I got on in my kitchen sink, I need authorization from EPA to get rid of it?
No, Miss Deborah. These items, once used for household purposes, does not require environmental authorization from the EPA. However, you should still take necessary steps to ensure that these materials are stored and disposed of in an environmentally safe manner.
Thank you so much for the information. I go in and tell he that he needs an environmental authorization. Thank you.
At the Environmental Protection Agency, we believe that the environment is everybody's business. We can start caring for our planet by becoming more environmentally friendly in our everyday actions. Here's what you can do. Dispose of waste in a garbage bin. Clean our drains, yards, and carpets regularly. Take a reusable shopping bag to the market. Support local butchers and farmers to reduce packaged waste. Plant a kitchen garden, trees, and flowers. Compost your organic waste. Conserve water and electricity. Carry a reusable water bottle. These little acts are good for your health and that of the environment. Remember, healthy people work better and achieve more, and together, small actions make a big difference. For further information on how you can help, please contact the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Ganges Street, Sophia, or telephone us at 225-5467. You can also visit our website, epagana.org, or our Facebook and Instagram pages.
From the gift of Iwakrama to the groundbreaking low-carbon development strategy, Guyana, the land of many waters, land of the giants, has been a leader on environmental management and biodiversity conservation in the Caribbean and on the world stage. Guyana is now embarking on a bold new path that places environment at the center of its development. Our country's Green State Development Strategy is our country's long-term development plan that seeks to reorient and diversify Guyana's economy, reducing reliance on traditional sectors and opening up new sustainable income and investment opportunities. The GSDS will provide the foundation for an inclusive green economy, which will result in improved human well-being and social equity while reducing environmental risks. In 2016, a bold move was made to ban styrofoam food containers through legislation and enforcement. We joined the rest of the world in beating plastic pollution for World Environment Day and beyond.
Are you involved in a business or thinking about starting one? Do you know there may be environmental impacts from business activities? According to the Environmental Protection Act of 1996, businesses such as gas stations, rice mills, large-scale agriculture and poultry farms, large-scale mining and forestry operations, hotels and resorts must be authorized. Persons proposing any of these activities need to submit an application for environmental authorization to the EPA.
Welcome back. For those of you who have just joined us, we were watching the Environment Matters, where we are focusing on why water matters. In the studio, we have Miss Felicia Adams-Kelman and Miss Michelle Nurse, both senior environmental officers at the Environmental Protection Agency with responsibility for water quality management. And before we went to the break, we were examining some of the pressures on our water resources, you know, trying to help you to get a greater appreciation for what we have and not basically take it for granted, right? So Felicia was talking about discharges from households being one of the
Yes.
pressures. So what other pressures, what other areas impact our water resources?
So, in addition to the discharge from households, we have discharges from industrial activities and discharges from industries such as the beverage industry, the fisheries industries. These activities or operations utilize a lot of water. So they put a lot of pressure on the surface water system because they use it in their processes, surface and groundwater. And as just like the household, when you bring in water to your system, it has to be discharged. And so what they are releasing is not just the water that they take out of the rivers and the creeks and the wells, but it is now mixed with their ingredients that they use within their processes, thereby releasing pollutants into the water. So that's another one. The third pressure that we have is mining, and I think this is one that has been publicized a lot in the newspapers, on Facebook, and it's related to improper mining practices. So these practices within the mining area use a chemical called mercury in their amalgamation process, and this chemical is very toxic. So when it gets into the waterways, it can have severe impacts on not only the quality of water but the aquatic system that's also living in the water. The fourth one is agricultural use, which speaks to the use of fertilizers, pesticides, and other chemicals within the crop
sector.
industry. Yes, so rice and sugar and all these things. When the rain, the heavy rain that we talk about, when the heavy rain falls onto these croplands, what we get is surface runoff. So the water will then carry all the chemicals right back into the source of surface water, which can cause contamination. The final one that we have as a pressure is land use change. I know in Guyana we may not have proper zoning, if you want to say, but certain areas are dedicated for certain types of land use because of various reasons. So what you would find is a person would go and develop a particular activity in an area which may not be appropriate for it, given that, as Michelle mentioned, some of the aquifers are very shallow. So if you go and you suddenly decide, oh well, I'm going to develop a livestock rearing agricultural activity in that area, there is a high possibility that the waste from this activity can contaminate the aquifers in addition to surface water. So those are the 5 main pressures of water resources in Guyana.
You want to add any, Michelle?
The only other added pressure that will come with time is climate change, as we expect. Because with climate change, our weather patterns are going to change, and the amount of precipitation we get is also going to change, and we're not sure how it's going to change and where it's going to change. So we also have to be prepared for that in our planning in the future.
Excellent, because you can have periods of intense rainfall, as we're having now.
Yes, yes.
And it's
out of rainy
August,
season.
and we're way out of the rainy season.
And for example, that's important for groundwater because it's once the soil becomes saturated, no more water can trickle down at that point. And what happens is you get runoff, and so the aquifer won't recharge as quickly, because instead of the rainfall happening over a period of time and slowly being absorbed, more of it is running off. And so that also is where we're going to see the pressures on recharging our aquifers.
And when it
for
runs
water
off,
use.
where does it go?
Straight into rivers.
So even that is important in terms of what that was the component of that runoff.
Yes,
That
very
ends
important.
up into the rivers and stream. As you talk about pressures to even population pressure, you know, increasing population. We know Guyana, we are most of the population, over 90%, on the coastline, right? And even with more people coming to the city for jobs and whatever, other reasons, that in itself can put pressure on your water resources and what's available, because you have more people extracting, you have more even more waste being produced, you know, from more people and stuff like that. So it's important that adequate systems are in place to address these pressures and the persons are aware of it, and they are utilizing the system, because we need everybody to do their part, and to take on their responsibility in this regard. Let's look at what would you say are some of the impacts of our water resources on. We know water is a part of our system, and it's interconnected with everything else we do. All of our activities and so on hinges on water and its availability. In terms of health, what's the really? Sometimes we disconnect. We just think of water as there for us to drink and wash and do the basic household chores, but we disconnect the broader uses. What about the impact of water on health? I mean, sometimes you could probably readily see that with sanitation, because if you don't have water, chaos. I mean, if the pipe cut off for a day or two, and your tanks, if you have tanks, or even if you don't have tanks, problems basically. So I want you ready to speak some more to the impacts of water on our health, probably the economic impacts, and the social impacts, and of course the environment. I know we would have spoken a bit on that earlier, but in terms of the link between water and the environment.
All right, I could speak to the first two of the four first, because I think that may relate more to the public. So the first one I would speak to is, let's say, social, and one of the impacts would be conflict between persons. And it may sound, oh, why are we having conflict over water? But as you say, during the dry periods, the demand for water is more. And if you look across to your neighbor, and your neighbor is extracting from his well at rapid paces, and it's affecting what you can extract, then there's a conflict there. That's an issue, number one issue. And I think a lot of people would recognize it. I spoke in relation to wells, but it could even be if you're getting water from a GWI tap and your neighbor is pressure washing next door, you would realize that your level of pressure decreases, and that can cause social conflict within the community in regards to access to water.
So if you don't have somebody washing down a house.
Exactly, and you're there trying to wash your clothes, and the water's not there. So the other one I can speak to that persons may also relate to is the health impacts, as you rightly mentioned.
But just to interject, I know we're speaking at this local level here, but even when we talk about conflicts, so many of the wars that are being fought globally are over resources, and water is one of those. So it even conflicts, we have local conflicts, but more on the widest scale of things, there are many wars, as we said, people are dying over water. Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so, as I said, the other one that persons can relate to is the health impacts related to polluted waters. Michelle would have spoken to the pollution of aquifers, and I would have spoken somewhat to the pollution of surface waters. And if persons consume this polluted water, there is a very high possibility that they can become sick with diarrhea diseases, gastroenteritis, cholera, typhoid. All of these things can be a result of using contaminated water. So you have to take precautions to make sure that, one, you are not polluting the water, and the water that you're using is not polluted. I don't know if you can speak to me.
In terms of economic development, we need water not only in a quantity to supply the potential industries we hope that are going to be developed in Ghana with the influx of our new oil and gas industry. We're hoping that with it will come industry, and this industry will put pressure on our water resources. So, however, with industry will also come economic activity. So we have to ensure that the water that is produced, we balance it. We primarily ensure that our population will have enough water to supply themselves in the quantity and quality that they need, but also that enough can be provided for the industry that will provide the economic activity required to help boost the economy.
In addition to what Michelle is speaking about in terms of economics, I think earlier in the segment she mentioned about 90% of the water for us is from groundwater. And that's mainly because groundwater is a relatively clean source of water. There is not a lot of treatment required for groundwater. However, if it becomes polluted, and as she said again earlier, it's very hard to clean, then we would have to look towards using surface water as a source of water, which would incur a lot of costs because the treatment options for surface water would be greater and more expensive than it currently is for groundwater. So that is from the economic side. In terms of environmental, a lot of aquatic species live within waterways. These can be affected by the various levels of pollutants which enter. I know a lot of fish kills would have been in the public recently, and what happens with that is because of the pollutants entering the water stream, it causes an influx of vegetation, as you probably see along the canals. And what that does, it reduces the oxygen levels for certain species, and it could cause death, it could cause reproductive issues within the species, and so life as we know it may deplete. And I think you also mentioned earlier one of the main ecological processes would be the water cycle, and that would be
which
great.
we learn in school, but we
exactly,
but
we
don't
recognize
usually
the importance of it.
Exactly.
Yes.
On a daily basis.
That could be greatly affected by pollution as well.
And also I wanted to inject here for the health sector as well. While there may be discharges and so on from these sectors, even in the operation themselves, fresh water is critical. Sterilizing and cleaning and washing stuff and all of that. So that is also important. And you shouldn't have like a hospital or health center or any one of these health facilities without running water. That's really unacceptable for the basic standards of sanitation, because water is that important. All right, so anything else that relates to social or economic, even environment? I know a lot of people, you talk about the fish and the fish, and the persons may directly relate to the fact that a lot of people like fish. You go on the wharf early in the morning and persons are there. It's even a means of income for many persons who will be selling fish and chips and so on. But outside of that, the whole system of the aquatic and the relationship with the terrestrial species or those on land and the relationship with us, it's all again interconnected,
the food
right?
chain.
So the food chain, the web. So if our activities compromise the ability of the aquatic species to thrive, that could also impact the quantity and the types of resources that we have available for us. So coming into the crux of the matter now, what role does the EPA play in water resources management?
Well, our mandate is to conserve, manage, protect our natural resources, of which ground water and surface water is included in that, and ensure its sustainable use. Emphasis on sustainable. Right?
Not that you can't use, but
Not
you
that
should
you
be
can't use.
wise in the way you
In
use
the way
it.
in which we
Consider,
use it.
yes, consider it.
Yes, and given that that is our mandate, the agency does have a process in which they do so, and it's through our environmental authorization process where we regulate what you can discharge into the water using prescribed limits for parameters. So it's an entire process that we have where you're issued with a permit, and the permit will specify exactly what you can and cannot do in relation to the use of the water resources.
And if you want to speak briefly to the water quality regulations
So
of
the
2000 and what are some of the areas that will focus on?
So the water quality regulations just does what I basically said. It gives
For the
us the power
authorization.
to regulate discharge from operations into the environment. It also requires us to monitor these discharges to make sure that persons are in compliance with whatever prescriptions the agency has given to them.
And what are some of, probably just a few examples, what are some of those discharges you're referring to? What are the parameters?
All right, so parameters vary based on the type of operation. So the Guyana National Bureau of Standards has effluent discharge limits for Guyana, similar to international effluent discharge limits. And for each sector, there are particular parameters that you need to test for. So some would be biological oxygen demand, chemical oxygen demand, turbidity, total nitrogen, total phosphorus. So all of these parameters are heavily dependent on what your effluent would constitute. So depending on your process, what you're discharging would have a chemical makeup. And based on that, we would determine what parameters you need to test for, how often you should test for them, and what are some of the treatment technologies you need to employ at your facility in order to be able to release your effluent into the environment.
Excellent. So you mentioned earlier in our conversation that there are some sectors or some areas that actually pressure our water resources. You mentioned discharges from households, I believe, industries and mining and so on. What are some recommendations you would make for some of these establishments?
My first recommendation would be to stop discharging untreated wastewater into the environment. Come into the agency and be guided on the process in terms of do analysis on your wastewater. Find out exactly what is in it. And when you have that information in hand, then the best possible treatment option could be determined for your facility. Because they have primary treatment options, secondary treatment options, but in order to invest, because it's very costly to invest in these technologies, you have to know exactly what you're discharging.
Or what the composition is.
What the composition is.
So what about households? You know, what are some things, like the average person looking, what are some areas that they should be mindful of when it comes to discharges?
So the households are relatively, in terms of black water, which I explained is the urine and the excreta, installation of a septic tank would be recommended. That is a form of treatment, so the effluent that is discharged from the septic system should be in accordance with international standards. Once your septic tank is built according to engineering specifications, because a lot of persons, they just think the septic tank is a hole with a concrete cover. But indeed, it has components within the septic tank that help to treat the water as it flows
for
through.
bacteria and so on
Yes,
to break down the
and
waste
act on the waste.
material.
Exactly. So you have to build it in accordance to specifications, and that will somewhat deal with the black water from households. In terms of grey water can be recycled. It can be used to water your plants, irrigation. It's not expensive, and it can be done by everybody. So those are some of the recommendations for households.
And for industries and so on. I know China and Japan, so they're big on technology as it relates to recycling their water. Of course, they have serious population pressures and all of that. So the thing is, with the problems, they are those people who are focusing on the problems, and there are persons who are looking for a tangible solution. So, you know, with every problem, there's some sort of solution, and it's what recommendations would you give to like industries and stuff? I know, to try to take stock of your operations now at this stage. Guyana is going into, you know, a major developmental boom, so to speak. So it's important for you to have your standards and your systems in place to look at what you discharge, to look at your operation and see where you can make it even more efficient. You know, whether it's something that needs to change or adjusted, or something in your process that you can even have a cycle as it relates to your water and so on, that it's used, the water from one part of the factory goes somewhere else, and you know, and it's there. So it's important for industries as well to, you know, take note of the technology. Sometimes, you know, you'll be doing things a certain way for a number of years. It seems to be working for you, and you think you're fine with it, But unless you explore other options and you tap into new opportunities and so on, you may never know that you're probably your production could even be higher, much higher, if you just do a small, little bit of tweaking to your operation.
And what I also think would be a good recommendation is for them to think about it before they even start to develop, because a lot of new operations are coming on stream and they don't have plans for these systems. So when it's not required, their entire budget is thrown off balance and you hear all sorts of excuses. So when you're planning for development, plan to protect water as well.
And plan to use the most efficient available technology. The initial investment may probably be a little high, but it will benefit you in the long run.
Yes.
In the long run, exactly. Especially as we really speak to this very precious resource. All right, so we're about to wrap up our discussion, and I hope that persons really are beginning to appreciate why water matters. The United Nations estimated 3 billion people lack basic hand washing facilities, and that's a lot of people, not to have the opportunity to wash their hands. And we know how hand washing goes very far away in preventing, certain diseases and so on. Because most of the people on our hospital beds are there because of, some practice, some environment, because of something that they would have been exposed to in the environment, or something they would not have washed their hands properly, and some kind of transfer of bacteria or whatever, or some virus occurs. So hand washing is very important. And if we look at the connection, and you use the doors, and you shake hands and different things, and imagine what is being transferred there from one person to another. So it's important that we have access to such facilities. And as well as the Green State Development Strategy speaks to integrated water resources management, and really having some scientific data in Guyana in terms of what's really available, what are some of the pressures, how we can really adjust as we move into a green developmental path, and even an emerging oil and gas sector, which is heavily offshore and so on. And the country, of course, is attracting a whole lot of external investors that are coming in. And as you mentioned, they may be added pressure. So it's important for us to have some systems in place. So just to wrap up, ladies, what are your final thoughts on this, on why water matters? What would you leave your takeaway message for the viewing public?
That do not take water for granted. Do not always believe that it's just there for you to use, because one day you'll wake up and realize that it's not, and then you will really know the value. So what I would tell you to do right now is just take a step back and assess how you are using your water and what you are doing to possibly contribute to pollution, and see how you can reduce that in your own way. It doesn't have to be expensive, as we mentioned. Little things go a long way in terms of your installation of technologies. Turn off the pipe while you're soaping your hand. Don't leave the water running. Simple things
like that.
Right?
Turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth.
Back in the days when you wash, you had to get your skin wet, and the pipe had to be overflowing with your clothes that you're rinsing,
So
all the time until you're finished.
Yes.
And those are some things that we
simple
take for
things you
granted.
can implement in your day-to-day activities that would be beneficial to not only you but everybody in the long run.
Yes, indeed.
Michelle, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are that each person should take it upon themselves to think about, how can I, in my home, conserve my water use? It's not just one person, but if everyone thinks about it and everyone does it, it will have a greater impact, and everyone will profit from each man doing his little part. As they say, one dati biladan.
And when one person is affected,
all are affected.
Everyone, whether we're directly or indirectly, you know, it affects all of us. So I do hope that, you know, you've really begun to understand why water matters. You know, it's more than just something that we drink or we bathe with or brush our teeth. It supports life, it underpins development. And I want to thank you ladies very much for joining me on this edition of the Environment Matters, and to thank the viewing public as well for joining us. As usual, at the Environmental Protection Agency, we would like to hear from you. So you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can contact us on our telephone numbers 225-546729. We have our website, of course. You can send us an email. So or you can actually come into the office, and one of the officers, of course, will be willing to speak with you if you would like further information. We also have a lot of resources, publications that are available that can help you to make better choices. So thank you once again for joining us. Until next time, I have been your moderator, Candace Thompson, and I want to leave you with a quote from Thomas Fuller, which says, "You may not know the worth of water until the well is dry. So please don't allow your well to get dry." Bye.